The van looked like any other delivery. But the moment Ranger barked, everything changed. What was hidden behind the panel left even the police stunned. Here's the full story, but before you get into it, tell us your favorite K9's name down in the comments. It was one of those calm fall mornings in Greenville, Ohio, where school bells still rang through neighborhoods and kids played under rust-colored trees. Brookfield Elementary sat tucked at the end of a two-lane street bordered by trimmed hedges, crossing guards, and families arriving with packed lunches and backpacks half-zipped. By 8:15 a.m., the parking lot had thinned. Parents had waved goodbye, buses had cleared. The only vehicles left were school staff, and one white delivery van idling at the side lot near the gymnasium. It had a magnet logo on the driver's side door, McCade's Supplies, in faded red letters, and a stack of cardboard boxes just inside the open side panel. Nothing unusual, not to a passerby. But K9 handler Officer Brent Holloway was trained to notice quiet patterns, and when his partner Ranger, a 6-year-old sable-coated German Shepherd, lifted his head sharply toward that side of the lot, Brent slowed the cruiser. They had been assigned a routine security patrol for the district, a trial rotation that put K9 teams in the area during school drop-offs, usually uneventful. But this morning, Ranger was not calm. He was fixed, eyes locked on the supply van, head stiff, tail tight, posture rigid. Brent pulled over. He trusted Ranger. The dog had worked narcotics and patrol detail for nearly 4 years. Never overreacted, never guessed. When Ranger emitted a low growl before the car even stopped, Brent's foot was already on the brake. Brent stepped out slowly, letting Ranger move first. The dog's body leaned forward, not toward the open side where the boxes sat, but toward the rear of the vehicle, a section of the van that appeared completely sealed. The driver, a man in a collared navy shirt with rolled sleeves, stood just outside the van door, clipboard in hand, chatting with a school maintenance worker. He smiled when Brent approached, nodded casually. But his eyes darted toward Ranger. Brent gave a quick nod in return but kept watching Ranger, who was now circling the rear of the van. Then came the bark, short, sharp, loud. The driver jumped slightly. The maintenance worker looked confused. Brent watched as Ranger barked again, then lunged toward the closed rear panel, pawing hard at the door's lower seam. Not the open side with supplies. The sealed back, smooth and spotless. Ranger's message was clear. Brent signaled for the driver to step back and asked to inspect the van. Standard procedure when a K9 flags a vehicle in a school zone. The driver hesitated just for a second. Not long enough to raise alarms, but Brent saw it. Then the man shrugged and handed over the clipboard. Inside the cabin, everything appeared clean. Standard delivery bins, inventory sheets, a dispatch tag from McCade's distribution center 2 towns over. But Ranger ignored the cabin. He remained locked on the rear panel. Brent opened the back doors. The light hit stacked chairs, sealed paper boxes, printer ink, the usual. But the moment he stepped closer, Ranger barked louder, this time at the interior left wall of the van. A side that was supposed to be solid metal, but sounded hollow. Brent tapped it with his knuckle. The echo was off. Not steel on frame. It was something else. With backup called and the school administrator now on site, Brent opened the toolbox from the cruiser and carefully removed the paneling inside the van. At first, just insulation. Then, a plywood wall, custom fit behind the metal. And behind that, a hidden compartment, 2 feet wide, stretching the entire length of the van's rear quarter. Inside, a duffel bag, tightly sealed, taped at the edges, wedged in the cavity so precisely it wouldn't have shifted even on rough roads. The compartment had no ventilation, no markings. Brent pulled the bag out slowly and set it on the ground. The air changed around them. Ranger paced now, quiet, eyes trained on the bag like he was waiting for permission. When the zipper opened, so did the first wave of disbelief. Inside the duffel were multiple black pouches zip-locked, each one carefully sealed. Brent opened the first. It contained prescription pads, blank, printed and branded from several area clinics. Another pouch, stacks of falsified school IDs with real children's names but altered photos and barcodes. And in the final pouch, a small hidden camera with magnetic mounts and a live transmission card still warm from use. This wasn't stolen office supply. This was surveillance equipment. Documentation forgery, the kind used to bypass background checks, the kind used to infiltrate. The van's driver, still silent, now sat handcuffed beside the patrol car. Brent hadn't said a word to him since the find. He didn't have to. Ranger had already said enough. By 11 a.m., Homeland Security had been notified. It wasn't the contents of the van alone, it was where the van was, near a school, with a forged business name, and none of the contact info for McCade's matched their official distribution database. It had been cloned, a logo printed to match a real supplier, a man trained to speak the lingo, boxes of real school goods placed inside to complete the cover, but behind the panel, tools to impersonate staff, enter facilities, and record silently. The van had parked near the playground side, which had no exterior camera coverage. Ranger hadn't reacted to packaging, or food, or people. He had locked in on the hidden signals of danger, and by doing so, stopped something that was clearly about to begin. He gave no name, no ID, no phone, no criminal record, no fingerprints in any law enforcement database. But the tag on his belt loop? Brent noticed it as he collected the man's belongings. A barcode strip sewn into the fabric. He scanned it into the report system. It came back as a logistics scanner ID, once used by a shipping company that shut down 3 years earlier after its owner was investigated for child exploitation material found in disguised cargo vans. No formal charges were ever filed. But now, this van, its hidden compartment, forged paperwork, altered school IDs, was sitting outside a playground, and it had taken one dog to bring it into view. Brookfield Elementary went into soft lockdown for the rest of the day. No panic, no evacuation, just a quiet security sweep of all access points, updated sign-in logs, and a review of which areas had camera blind spots. Brent stayed on site with Ranger until the last bell rang. Teachers thanked him. Parents whispered when they saw the van being towed. But Brent didn't want credit. He looked at Ranger, calm now, ears still forward, and knew it had come down to a split second. Had they driven past the lot? Had they not stopped? Had Ranger not barked? The van would have finished unloading and left unnoticed. And whatever it had planned would have moved forward. That night, federal agents retrieved the van from the impound lot. They examined every inch. Behind the false wall, on the panel's interior, was a burned QR code, barely visible unless lit from the side. The partial code matched a batch of shipping numbers that originated from a warehouse in Toledo, flagged once by investigators for untraceable shipments of electronics routed through multiple states. No known source, no delivery records, just vans, empty by the time they were inspected, until this one. This one had not been empty, and it had parked within feet of children. That night, Brent sat on his porch, Ranger lying on the steps just below him. The dog's breathing was slow, deep, rested, satisfied. Brent stared at the trees in the distance. The news hadn't broken publicly, it probably never would, but he knew what they'd stopped. He reached down, placing a hand on Ranger's head. The dog didn't move, just opened his eyes briefly, then closed them again. Sometimes the smallest signs, one growl, one glance, change everything, and sometimes the right dog knows exactly when to give that sign. The delivery van had been towed under federal supervision to a secure storage unit outside Dayton. Its contents, everything from blank school IDs to surveillance gear, had been logged, bagged, and transferred to evidence. But something still wasn't sitting right. Why Brookfield Elementary? It wasn't a major city school. No recent threats, no known connection to criminal groups, and yet the man behind the wheel had sat calmly, surrounded by federal agents, and said nothing. Not denial, not protest, just silence. Ranger had done his part. But Brent Holloway knew the real questions were only beginning. A digital forensics unit out of Columbus ran a full trace on the McCade's Supplies branding that had been on the van. They found a match, but it wasn't exact. The logo was pulled from a 2018 archived version of McCade's website, outdated, discontinued during a rebrand. Someone had taken the old logo, printed it professionally, and magnetized it to the van door. The phone number listed on the van rang to a fake voicemail claiming to be a regional delivery line, but the number itself traced back to a burner account activated 6 days earlier in New Jersey. It wasn't sloppy, it was calculated, which meant whoever was behind this had done it before. Local authorities were given a license plate list for all supply vans that had entered the Greenville School District in the past 60 days. One number matched. A camera mounted at Sheffield Middle School, 13 miles away, had captured a similar white van in its staff lot, same model, same make, but with a different magnetic logo. This time it read, SunWest Tech Installations. That visit had been recorded as routine maintenance on classroom projectors, but the school district had never ordered it, and no one had questioned it because the man showed paperwork. He was polite, he wore a uniform, he walked in with a clipboard and left without incident. No one remembered his face clearly, no one knew where he had gone, but Brent had a guess. 3 days later, Brent returned to Brookfield Elementary, not as an officer but as a silent observer. He parked across the street in an unmarked vehicle and watched. Parents pulled in and out. Teachers hustled through the doors. Children laughed by the recess field. But Brent wasn't watching them. He was watching the edges, the janitor access door, the back alley gates, the parking lot blind spots, and something stood out. A security camera recently installed over the side lot was pointed downward at an odd angle. He walked over after hours and checked the mount. It had been tampered with, loosened just enough to knock it off axis. The bolt was finger tight. Whoever parked that van had prepped the scene, made sure no video would capture the license plate. This wasn't random. It was a test. The burned QR code on the hidden panel in the van had finally returned a partial trace, matching a manufacturing code used by a warehouse in Toledo, now operating under a different name. Brent wasn't part of the federal task force, but the FBI liaison had called him personally after reviewing his initial report. And Ranger's alert had been labeled as critical intervention. They invited him to assist in a quiet sweep of the warehouse. Ranger had been trained for urban searches, industrial spaces, tight corridors. He wasn't just a nose, he was a precision instrument. Brent agreed. They drove up before sunrise. The Toledo warehouse had been gutted on the surface. Rows of shelves stood empty, paperwork shredded, and power partially disabled. But the exterior of the loading dock bore signs of recent tire marks. Inside, Ranger moved low to the ground, tail still, steps controlled. At first, nothing. Then, halfway down the second row of racks, his body stiffened. He turned left into a dark corner where broken crates had been pushed aside. He paused, sniffed the air, took 2 steps back, then barked. Brent followed. Behind the crates was a makeshift crawl tunnel cut into the drywall, barely shoulder width. Inside, buried beneath plastic tarps and collapsed cardboard, was another duffel bag. This one contained blank school access cards from 2 other states, a full hard drive encrypted, a disposable cell phone with 2 messages sent and unsent. One message read, "Test passed. Ohio site marked. Await trigger." Federal agents ran a trace on the disposable phone. It had pinged once, briefly, 3 nights before. Location: a public parking lot across from Park Hill Elementary, just west of Columbus. That school had no K-9 patrols, no camera coverage at the staff entrance. The same model of white van had been seen near there by a crossing guard. No one had recorded a plate, but it matched the pattern. Fake van, forged logos, school site, only this time no Ranger, no Brent, no bark, just silence. That night, Brent sat outside his apartment with Ranger lying by his side, chin resting on one paw. He didn't speak aloud, but his thoughts raced. He had seen operations before, drug trafficking rings, ID fraud units, tech scams, But this was different. This was intentional placement near children, near blind spots, near trust, the school IDs, the surveillance camera, the falsified clearance forms. And now this test passed message. They were preparing for something, measuring response, studying weakness, and his dog had become the one thing they hadn't accounted for. Inside the warehouse duffel was a map, printed, not digital. It marked 4 cities with faint red ink: Greenville, Toledo, Columbus, Ashland. Next to each, a 4-digit number was written. Not zip codes, not timestamps, but school building codes, real ones. When investigators contacted Ashland's school system, they found that one of those schools had recently reported a break-in. Nothing stolen, but a locked equipment room had been found open the next morning. No signs of forced entry, no alarm triggered, just a janitor door slightly ajar. Brent didn't sleep much that night. Not out of fear, but from the weight of realization. The van outside Brookfield hadn't been the start. It had been the one time they got caught, and only because a dog that wasn't supposed to be on that shift got reassigned the night before. That K-9 substitution, it was because of a scheduling change. Brent had been moved from a city patrol to school duty last minute after another handler called in sick. One change, one rotation, and the plan unraveled. If not for Ranger, that duffel bag would still be in circulation. That man would still be parked beside another playground. And the trigger? It might have already been pulled. The hard drive recovered from the Toledo warehouse took days to decrypt. But when federal techs finally broke through, they uncovered folders labeled not with names but with dates and codes. Inside, blueprints, schematics of school interiors, network login credentials, staff photos, and folders labeled Phase 1, entry profiles, and post-access routes. This wasn't a scheme for identity theft. This was infiltration, and it was far from over. Back in Greenville, the man arrested outside Brookfield Elementary still hadn't spoken. His fingerprints returned no match in the national database, but DNA traced a partial connection to a closed case in New Mexico, a trafficking investigation that had gone cold 3 years earlier after the only witness disappeared. The deeper they dug, the more it became clear this man had been moved, repurposed, and protected, a silent asset used to test weaknesses in school access points. And this time, his van had been caught early, only because a dog refused to look the other way. On the decrypted hard drive, one file was time-stamped for the upcoming Monday, less than a week away. It contained a full outline of Lincoln Ridge Elementary, a mid-sized school outside of Ashland, camera blind spots, entry times, staff routines, parking patterns, and a final note at the bottom of the page: observe, log, leave device. That was the trigger. Not a break-in, not an abduction. A device left behind. Purpose unknown. Intent unclear. But it was enough. Agents moved quietly. Security presence was boosted. Patrols were assigned undercover, and Brent Holloway was called. Brent arrived at Lincoln Ridge before 6 a.m. Ranger sat calmly in the back seat as the sky turned pink above the playground. Brent didn't speak. He never had to. When the first cars arrived, teachers, janitors, cafeteria crew, Ranger was already pacing near the side entrance. Everything appeared normal. Until 7:17 a.m., a white box truck pulled up to the loading zone. No magnet this time, just blank white panels and a clipboard in the driver's hand. The man stepped out slowly. No eye contact. Head down. Brent signaled without hesitation. Ranger barked once, short, low, then walked toward the truck's side. The man froze. Brent approached. The ID badge clipped to his shirt had a logo, one that had not been used by any contracted vendor in 5 years. Brent nodded toward the truck. Ranger jumped up, paws pressed against the rear panel, and barked again, this time twice, rapid and forceful. The plan had returned, and it was about to fall apart again. The rear door opened slowly. At first glance, it was filled with sealed boxes, copy paper, projectors, wires, but they weren't labeled. Brent stepped inside with 2 federal agents. Behind the stack of boxes buried near the front wall of the cargo bay was a sealed cooler, labeled discard. Inside, a black plastic container, lead-lined. Inside that, a small cube-shaped network device active and transmitting. The signal had been faint, barely detectable, but it had been pinging a local Wi-Fi signal with spoofed credentials. It was designed to act as a passive network mirror, collecting keystrokes and access card scans from anyone on the staff network. In the wrong hands, that meant replicating ID badges, staff clearances, internal access logs, and more. No violence, no intrusion, just a ghost walking silently through a digital door. And placing that cube at a school, it meant someone was planning to return. Over the next 48 hours, authorities pulled files from similar educational institutions across 3 states. At least 9 schools had been visited by various vans in the past 4 months. Different names, different logos, different drivers, but each time they left something small behind. A cable box that wasn't listed, a printer cartridge too heavy to be real, a junction plate with an extra wire. Each one, harmless on the surface, was a listening post. Each one had gone undetected until Ranger barked. The man behind the second truck was taken in. When confronted with the cube device, he said nothing, but his pulse spiked, his eyes narrowed, and when shown a photo of Ranger, his hands curled into fists. That one dog had upended a pattern carefully laid across months. It wasn't the bite, it was the timing, the bark, the refusal to ignore a sound, a scent, a signal that no human could detect. They never planned for that. The federal task force issued a confidential commendation to Brent Holloway and Ranger, but Brent didn't frame it. He folded it and placed it inside his locker, beside Ranger's first collar tag. What mattered wasn't the award. What mattered was that the chain had broken before it could go further. Ranger had made the difference, not technology, not protocol, just instinct. 2 months later, Ranger retired from active duty. Age was catching up, his hearing still sharp, but hips starting to slow. Brent signed the paperwork without hesitation. Ranger came home with him for good. They walked together at dawn, visited schools, sat quietly by lakes. Sometimes Brent would catch Ranger staring into the distance, still alert, still tracking things only he could smell. And Brent would smile, because somewhere deep inside those eyes was the same dog who once barked at a plain white van parked next to a playground and changed everything. The van that had stopped at Brookfield Elementary was never traced to a final source. The driver remained silent, transferred to a secure holding facility. The cube devices were collected, logged, and dismantled. And the schools, they rewrote security protocols, added K-9 units to their morning patrols, and quietly trained staff to look for things that didn't belong. But most of them never knew how close it had come, how close they were to never knowing at all. If not for one dog, if not for one bark, you never know what's hiding in plain sight. And sometimes it takes one dog to reveal it all. If that gave you chills, drop a like and hit subscribe, because the next story, you'll want to be here when it breaks.